everyone, welcome to the Life of Education podcast. So today we're here with Greg. So Greg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi Caroline. I'm a university academic in Australia. One of my fields of speciality is professional ethics.
So basically we're going to talk about ethics today.
Yes, ethics with a spin on the fitness world, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think that's quite important, because I know from my education through university, we didn't really touch on ethics. It was kind of always present and inherent in the modules that we would do. You know, you greet your client this way, do this, look at it from a rehab and an injury perspective, taking notes down, medical notes, you've got to keep this safe, confidential. That was all there, but it was never really under the heading of, right, this is how you behave and how you conduct yourself from an ethical standpoint. So trickling down back through the diplomas and the certificates that I did, I'm certain that there's a huge population of fitness instructors and maybe yoga instructors who don't know, they're not fixed on that. There's no formal education on ethics, professionalism. It's just sort of...
Yeah, I think a lot of the time it's like there's a page of ethics in your manual. They go read it on your own. And then when you get into the real world and you have to actually like practice and be a professional within your industry, then you start to say, oh, well, maybe I didn't do that so great. And there needs to be a little bit of structure and guidelines as to that. What's your experience of this?
Yes, so in my case, I'm in an unusual position of being a university academic with experience in teaching this field, but myself and my partner also own two fitness businesses. So I've been able to see it from both sides, from the practical side of what it's like to be a business operator within a field, and then also knowing both the theory and the practice that happens in a more codified university setting. So what I'd say to the fitness industry more generally is it's been a less codified industry in relation to ethics. So if you think about the traditional model of a professional being a doctor or a lawyer, there's very strict and set codified rules about what is ethical practice as a doctor or a lawyer. So for the fitness center industry and the fitness industry more widely, I think there's been a little bit more of a we'll just wing it approach, and your example is a classic one of there's a one page, this is our principle of ethics. So we'll read that on our own, and you just have to be a good person when you go out there and
that's
you
your
become
homework.
there's your homework. So yeah, some more structured, codified thinking through of what it's like to be an ethical business provider, whether that's an individual instructor within a larger company or your own company, whether it's a sole trader or part of a larger corporation. I think it would really benefit the fitness industry to be thinking through the level of complexity that's involved in professional to professional relationships and also professional to client relationships.
Yeah, those things are important. I think maybe you can explain to us a little bit about the more academic aspects of ethics.
Sure. So
and how it relates to the fitness industry. That's a good place to start.
It is. So in a traditional profession, there's four key elements that define a traditional profession. Something like medicine or law being a typical example. It would be that it's something that's engaged in the public interest, that it's self-regulated, that it's doing an important type of service, and that it involves extensive training or formalised education. So from the ethics side of things, a traditional profession has had hundreds of years to work through and think through all the kinds of things that might be challenging in, say, practicing law or practicing medicine. In the fitness industry, as a relatively recent industry, it's been less codified. So in that sense, we would call that less professionalised. You might still do it as a job, so you could be a professional footballer and your job is playing football for a living, but that doesn't mean you work in a profession, which is a codified, structured industry that has specific ethical rules. So the fitness industry, I think, is in one of those early emerging phases of trying to think through what kind of industry it should be, and then becoming increasingly more regulated as it moves on. An example in Australia would be that some of the industry organisations that have cropped up, so they started off as a movement, whether it's aerobics, and then yoga, and then Pilates, and then CrossFit. All these kind of industries start off with industry operators as individual businesses, and then an association tends to develop, and from there it provides an opportunity to have more codified discussions around what ethical practice would involve.
I think when you talk about self-regulated, like what's the sort of position there? What do you mean by that?
It's a good question. So in the case of medicine, there would be some kind of medical tribunal, or in Australia's case, there's the Australian Medical Association. That's an industry body that looks after registering and then also making judgments on professional practice about people that they've then allowed themselves to register. So once you've officially become a doctor who's licensed, that license can be taken off you. So the self-regulated element is the best people to make a judgment about if that's good practice would be people that also work in that same industry. So the person that knows best about is the doctor acting professionally is another doctor, or a panel of doctors. So in a traditional profession like that, there's very strict rules around membership of that association, and the bargain that society makes with that association is you know what best describes medicine and health, so therefore we'll allow you to register and look after your own members. So that element for self-regulation hasn't been developed yet to that same level of structured, codified practice as the traditional professions in something like the fitness industry.
Yeah. We were sort of talking briefly before the podcast that one of the modules that we did in my university was taught to us by a physio who had been struck off there was a scandal on a rugby pitch where the team needed to get a substitute on. They had to have a blood injury by the law of the game, the rugby match, to get the player off. So he had a little blood capsule, made his lip bleed, walked off, a little bit suspicious, gave a little wink. The opposition thought something was up. After the game, they banged on the door of the dressing room, and the doctor and the physio cut the player's lip to show that there was an injury, a legit injury. And then this all came out to light, and then the physio was struck off completely for his part in this. The doctor had a ban, and the coach had a ban, but the physio was then in the room teaching us for an afternoon on sort of, this is the mistake I made, you guys need to be aware, there's a lot of things that go on with ethics, and he was talking about it from a position of he made a mistake, don't make the same mistake he made. But that was about all. I mean, we never had any structured guidance of ethics, and aside from patient confidentiality, what do you think are the biggest things that people are missing in the fitness industry?
It's a really good question. So I think people are pretty comfortable in the fitness industry about patient confidentiality. You have some personal information about someone that might be quite sensitive as well, and that should be treated with respect. So if I had to take a guess from my experience, I'd say that's done reasonably well. You'd have to be a bit of a cowboy operator to not be treating confidential information well. So the areas that are missing are the more difficult professional judgment areas that only are developed through sustained reflective practice. So that physio example, he knows that that's the wrong thing to do in that moment. Not necessarily for his club, and that's the dilemma that he's placed within, but he knows that that's the wrong thing to do as someone who's meant to treat someone and improve their health. You shouldn't be deliberately injuring your client. There's no way he would think that was okay practice. So in that sense, once he gets caught, it's very clear from a professional standpoint that he's not been engaging in correct practice. Hence a ban, and that sounds a really substantial one as well. Yeah. It's a major change in his life from being a registered physio to then having obviously to do something else. In the case of physios itself, physios, chiros, the things that are now, you can just start to call yourself a doctor of chiropractic, or doctor of physiotherapy, a doctor of a few different medically trained areas within the fitness industry. there's a little bit more of that same development that's happened about structured, codified areas of practice. For the fitness industry more generally, I think there's still a significant gap between things that are clearly right and wrong, like you should treat your client's information with confidentiality. Where the really tricky ones is I agree with you that hasn't been significant enough training for future fitness industry professionals, and also the people that are already engaged in practice that are then trying to do some continuing education practice. So that's a longer, more difficult, more nuanced form of training that someone's going to need years of practice and reflection for them to garner on their own, but can be offered through education modules to help guide you through that process, to try and speed up the process between this is the industry that I'm in, what is it to be a good professional in this industry, and then thinking through those difficult situations of what do I do when I'm stuck in a morally or ethically challenging situation, and I have to find a resolution, and then how do I live with that resolution comfortably over a period of time as well.
What would be a typical example of that sort of predicament?
In the fitness industry, yeah, it's a good question. So the two classic examples would be professional relationships between professionals themselves and their clients. I don't necessarily mean personal relationships, but how you treat someone well over time and respectfully over time. In the health industry, you might have some people that have not just medically difficult situations, but personally and emotionally difficult situations. So being the right kind of person to support that person through their health experience, not just the fitness industry itself, but the other related professionals that are involved, would be a classic example. Another one would be the professional to professional relationship. So how do you deal with other people in your specific area of the health industry, and how you deal with the people in the health industry more generally, how you engage in professionally reflective practice between yourself and other people that are in
like
the
your
field.
Colleagues, right?
Could be your colleagues in your own practice, could be contemporaries who are competitors that you deal with at a collegial level. So you might go to a conference, a professional association, further education, and some industries do that really well. The people are open and collaborative with one another, and some industries do that less well. It would also be between yourself as the professional and other forms of professionals that relate to your industry. So it might be the chiro or the physio or the doctor or someone else who's also treating that same person while you're engaged in injury rehab. So there's a number of different stakeholders that you might be engaged with as a professional within the fitness industry, and learning how to deal with the competing challenges of those stakeholders is a very tricky endeavour, and I don't think it's trained well enough for people prior to their operation, and you have to just kind of, at the moment, learn it as you go along.
Yeah, it is a lot of practical learning.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons that we decided to start a life of education was initially, obviously, you know about my accident. But after I got out of hospital and started walking, I started looking for PTs here within Dubai, and I went to so many different PTs that were all professing that they were like rehab specialists, and all of the ones that I had gone to see were anything but. And they had no idea how to deal with any of the injuries that I had, and were putting me through very generic workouts that were very unsuited to my injuries, and they actually made me a lot worse. And obviously Keith and I met, and we were discussing this whole industry, how is this, that it's okay for this to happen within this industry, that they can take someone that's so injured and not even think actually, no, I'm not qualified to take this person through all of these actions at all, and people would just blag it. And because I'm in the industry, I was like, no, this is not right. This is definitely not right. And there's a lot of that, unfortunately, there's a lot of that exists all around the world. And I think sometimes people don't even realize when they're crossing that ethical boundary, they don't realize, well, actually, I'm here, I'm at the line, and I really need to consider this person's health over whether I think that I can do this. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's a really good example of what I was talking about before, that the industry's still relatively recent. So if you think about chiropractic or physiotherapy that have been around for decades in a codified sense, there's a clearer defined distinction about whether that would be ethical practice or not. So if you're in a fitness industry that's less codified, you can get away with claiming anything that you like, you know. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're using research or evidence-based practice in what you're doing. So it's a big challenge for fitness industry around the world, not just here, not just in Australia or the States or wherever it's going to be. And I think it's a symptom of that being a relatively new field. So people can still claim whatever they want to claim, and whereas if you did that as a doctor and you came out and you said, oh, I can cure cancer, and then people came along, well, show me the evidence that in peer-reviewed research that this is the case, then that person receives a lot of blowback, you know, fairly quickly. As a fitness industry professional, in going through your own experience, that's an interesting position to be in, because you had enough expertise yourself to go, well, this person isn't helping me, they're actually hindering me. Someone else without your same level of experience might have gone in and just thought, oh, it must be me, because I'm not getting better, and this person's telling me that they're giving me the right form of treatment. And that
they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing, and so you have a level of trust in their expertise. And that's what I mean about it's less codified, so you just have to make a leap of trust rather than trusting a fully registered, codified form of practice like physiotherapy or chiropractic. You could be a yoga teacher. I've experienced that myself. I've done yoga for a number of years, and I went to yoga in a place where we were on holiday, and I went to a yoga class, and I knew where the safe level of stretch was in a particular movement, and the yoga instructor came behind me and said, no, you need to go further, and pushed me further in the pose, and I tore one of my hamstrings. So in that case, I knew my own safe level. That person was coming from a well-meaning place, but they hadn't thought through the correct level of practice within their own discipline, because the whole point of yoga is you listen to your body and you find your place where you feel comfortable. So for yourself, for the going through your own experience, you've got a different hat that you can wear, where you can evaluate, is this person giving me the correct advice? Without that same level of expertise, you're opening yourself up to not even necessarily deliberately dodgy practice, but just well-intentioned, well-meaning practice that isn't at a sufficient level of expertise and training. Yeah,
so what I find really interesting is, because in the fitness industry you have so many different modalities. So you have Zumba, and then you have CrossFit, and then you have Pilates, and then you have yoga, and they're all very different. They have different training lengths, different training requirements, different everything. And so you can be qualified in a specific field and have done a 3-day course. And that doesn't give you the qualification, the whole umbrella qualification. It gives you like a small segment of that. But then you're under the umbrella of, I'm within the fitness industry, I'm practicing within my scope of practice. And then it's like a little bit of a, how do I say this? People deviate. So they're in Zumba, and then they do another 3-day course, and then they're in Pilates, and then they do another like 1-month teacher training intensive, and then they're in yoga, and they're funneling all the way around, but not really like understanding the full big picture. Yeah, and
you use an interesting cross comparison there between if you had someone who was professing to be a doctor, and then let's just take for granted that they actually are formally qualified as a doctor, but that's different from saying I'm a specialist in paediatric medicine or gastrointestinal disease or ocular disease. Those take a very large base level of training and then years of expertise in a particular area. So for the fitness industry, in one sense, they're treating the whole person. So just having one area of expertise in Zumba for 3 days or 3 months or whatever it is gives them some expertise in that modality, but it doesn't necessarily give them the expertise in
the foundation.
Underneath, and then the whole umbrella of, if I'm trying to treat this person for wellness. And the fitness industry really is about that. It is about wellness. It's either helping someone recapture an enhanced sense of wellness in the rehab side of things, or in the enhancing my level of fitness, or maybe body shaping or whatever it is. That's still in the space of wellness. So to profess a level of expertise through a small amount of specialised training in one area is not going to garner you enough experience or enough expertise in the larger field of wellness. So I really applaud these kinds of endeavours that the two of you are undertaking, because the fitness industry needs more good, well-researched, well thought through, codified levels of education.
Yeah,
Well,
it
thanks.
definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I think one of the things, just to pick up on, is you talk about the 3-day courses here and there. The problem that I find with them from my background is they coach people how to work with populations who are uninjured, fit, and able to do the endeavour, the discipline, the activity, the up and down, the side to side. That's not how people show up in reality on the gym floor or in the studio or
Rarely.
rarely, super rarely. So then you
Everybody has a back problem. Everyone has a twingling knee.
Yeah.
Oh, my shoulder
Yeah.
hurts because I sit so much.
Absolutely. You speak to people, you go, "Are you injured?" No. Okay. Go down to the next few questions, and then you start to feel that they stopped training 6 months ago because they got knee pain. Okay, so we have a knee problem. Okay, so just as well we sat and spoke before you joined that circuit class. Because that might get worse.
Yeah.
And then going back to one of the things you said earlier on, you get disgruntled. The client potentially gets disgruntled and thinks it's their fault.
Yeah.
But because the trust they put in the person was this injury wasn't factored in, so that's omitted. That's gone off the table, and now the person can't do the clamp, they can't do the squat, they can't do the run because their foot or their knee hurts. So what's the point? I'll just give up.
That's right. So a classic example would be a fitness centre that has one instructor up the front who is demonstrating practice. So whether it's yoga or Pilates or Zumba or whatever it is, the people across that room, the 10, 20, 30 people in that room, could potentially need all slightly modified instruction. So it's a really good point that you make, that the person who gets trained as an instructor is actually only as a modeler of practice, rather than what is the reality of this person's individual body and their fitness needs. So in our businesses, for myself and my partner, with her level of expertise, she can tailor in the Pilates industry, this is what you need to do now, and your body's not ready for this and this and this. So that's more of a bespoke approach to fitness and the health industry. And that level of expertise, it takes her instructors years to garner that level of expertise. So that's the difference between going to a class and seeing someone doing the practice, and usually they're very good at it. So the instructor's very good at it. So the client thinks,
I should look like that.
But maybe I should never be doing that whole section of exercise that they're now performing, because my body's not ready for that.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge for the industry, between the model and also the personalised instruction.
I agree with you entirely, and I think it makes it very challenging for a business when they're trying to compete with the fact that numbers equals greater revenue. So when you have things like that are, okay, well, where do I draw the line between I'm going to fit X amount of people in a class because this is what the instructor can adequately look after and modify and take care of, versus this studio needs to make this much money to stay open, so I actually need to fit in 10 more people. So there's a very, very fine line, and with different modalities within the industry, it's very different, like yoga and Zumba, and they're very different, the number of people that you can fit in and adequately make sure that they're safe.
Yeah. So my own experience from going on a 1-week yoga retreat, for example, is I think a good point of comparison. There was an expert instructor who was the runner, the overall person running the retreat.
The organizer.
The organizer, but also the main instructor. But then that person had assistants that were walking around the room giving individualised attention. So you shouldn't be doing this, remember to modify for this, etc. So we do that in our own businesses as well. Part of Helen's training programs are building expertise up in her instructors over time, and they'll spend hours with her being an assistant to help build that expertise. More broadly though, that's very difficult to do and still make enough money in the fitness industry. So it's a good point that you make. How do I scale up the number of people in my class and still provide satisfactory health benefits to everybody in that room? It's not something that's going to be an easily fixable issue. It's something that the industry needs to engage with. If you think about it compared to a traditional profession, you wouldn't think about walking into a medical practice and the doctor comes out the waiting room and goes, okay, everybody's going to get well today. Now let's just follow me. And I can see that you're actually feeling worse now. So you stop doing this. Now you keep doing this and you keep doing it. So that type of instruction is a different model. The model and copy is different from a traditional profession. So for a traditional profession, you have an enhanced level of expertise in the person that you're placing your trust in. And that's what the fitness industry doesn't have to copy, but it needs to learn from. That it's very difficult to give individualised attention in large group settings. So then how the business decides to allow clients to enrol in those, I think then that becomes a very important key, because you can actually be doing harm to your clients, and for yourself actually it's not a good long-term strategy, because that person that gets injured then stops coming as a client and maybe gets turned off the form of practice altogether. So it's something that each business needs to think through. How can they both scale up for profitability and also allow enough individualised attention that they're catering to each person's needs.
Yeah, see, this is a funny thing about ethics, that those lines are always grey.
They're always grey.
So grey, because it's like, okay, well, let's squeeze in 2 more people into this class. and then it's it's the butterfly that broke
the camel's back. Yeah. In your case, the camel's back. for
My back.
Yeah, your back. Yeah, that's right. And it relates really well to that example of the physiotherapist. That's a clear black and white, and that physiotherapist knew that they were doing the wrong thing to cut the lip. They were still involved in an ethically difficult situation, because the needs of the club are also part of their stakeholder requirements. They're employed by the club to be a physiotherapist, so that you can understand the person feeling drawn in that direction. The really interesting ones are the grey versus grey. That's where we spend our hours when we train in professional ethics, in trying to build up that level of thinking, not just through case study and practices and practice thinking, but also I try to instill in my university students the idea that they're always going to be engaging in this, and they need to be engaging in peer-to-peer reflection.
So I think picking up on the sort of the grey areas, that is sort of the one that people have trouble with, like, because not only is it sometimes you're aware that I'm in the grey area, sometimes you don't even know that you're in that area. So like from your lectures, what would be your sort of typical example that you'll be able to bring this to people's attention?
Yeah, so the area that we do the most work in at the university level is in moral dilemmas. So black versus white, a right versus wrong situation should be relatively easy to find an answer to. Should I take a bribe? Well, no, I shouldn't. So it might be morally challenging, because I might want to take the bribe, but there's a clear right versus wrong decision involved there. So the right versus right, the grey area ones are the trickier ones. So at the university level, what we try to do is take people through case studies and get them to engage with their peers that are then being trained in that same area to think through how they might resolve that. And there is no single perfect answer to any of those case studies. What I teach, though, doesn't mean there's any answer. So it's not just a free-for-all. There's going to be a set number of answers. It's not one, but there's going to be plural answers, but not no answer at all, and there's also not any answer at all. So either of those isn't reflective practice. There's no answer, it's just your answer's as good as mine, or any old answer will do. That's not actual proper reflective practice. Is engaging through the plural possible answers and finding a justified response that you feel comfortable with. that's even trickier over time. So over time, do I feel comfortable with those kind of decisions that I've made?
Yeah.
And do I feel comfortable when I tell other people about that, other professionals that I'm engaged with, or other people involved in my business or company? So at the university level, what we're trying to do is mimic those situations in case study and peer-to-peer discussion, in the hope that that builds a sense of reflective practice that person takes on through their journey in their post-university training. It should become a habit of practice. In tricky situations, I stop and I think through all of the potential ramifications of this situation. I question myself, I interrogate myself. Am I doing this from a justifiable, reason-through form of practice, or am I just trying to find an easy way out? So challenging yourself first, challenging yourself through talking to other peers that you feel comfortable with. So whether that's doctors talking to doctors, or accountants to accountants, teachers to teachers. And in the fitness industry, that is possible unless you're a sole trader. And a sole trader can still find a trusted confidant to bounce ideas off. But in most settings, you're going to have someone else that you can potentially think through those difficult situations.
So in particular, in this scenario within the fitness industry, you're recommending that if people get to situations where they find they're in a moral dilemma, that they should speak to their peers about what the best course of action is, and then do self-reflection.
Of course.
Which is what you just explained.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, even if you have no access to someone else, then start with self-reflection. So good, proper training in professional identity helps you think through what kind of principles I use to operate on. Now, when just people go through my university training on ethics, they might know at the end that, I'm primarily something that's called a consequentialist. So I find the way that the answer is correct by the method that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Or they might find that I'm a deontologist and I use prior moral principles regardless of consequences. And they learn that about themselves, that I'm this type of reasoner. But most people are a mixed reasoner, so finding some sense.
Are they just the two options?
Well, yeah, there's
Lots. Okay.
lots. Yeah, I was just using a couple because we use them as a yin and yang compare and contrast example. So for finding your own sense of professional practice and reflective morality, that's your first step. So the second part of your question about how can I discuss this with someone else, that's fantastic, but that's also another level of complexity, because that person's got to be prepared to be as confidential about that information as what I am. Impartial, confidential, reasoned, thoughtful, not self-interested.
Yes,
those are all
have
tricky.
Your
interest in mind, and the client's interest in mind as well. Or if it might be something that's nothing to do with the client. It might be something in your own professional practice that you're struggling with. So that trusted confidant is a really valuable tool. And through my own practice at the university level, there's people that I can have those discussions with. A classic example would be a psychologist. Every psychologist has their own psychologist. They need somewhere to where they go to help unwind, because you need to bounce some ideas off somebody. So in the fitness industry, that would be really useful, either peer-to-peer within the same company, or between yourself and a trusted other.
To bounce ideas. How do you determine that you're in a dilemma if you have no training whatsoever? Yeah,
that's a really good question, and we've probably all seen this in practice, that someone's only realised that after the fact. They've just gone with their gut instinct or whatever was the easiest solution, and then that's come back to haunt them afterwards. I mean, it might be I didn't know what I was doing, or sometimes you get a little inkling of, I think I'm taking the easy way out here, but you didn't listen to that voice. That voice is not necessarily your conscience, but another part of your reasoning faculty that's saying, hang on, take a little bit of time here. So for our training at the university level, that's what I really want my future professionals to do, is to just stop, take a breath, take a beat, have a think through things first, and then if you need to, bounce those ideas off somebody else. Because without running into that, it's usually experience has taught you that from something that's gone wrong, whether that's come back later that you found out you did the wrong thing, or the client's come back and said, I realised that what you did was incorrect, or you've destroyed a peer-to-peer relationship, whatever those kinds of examples will be, if you haven't been formally taken through some guided practice on how you develop professional identity, then experience is going to teach you that
The hard way.
The hard way.
Yeah.
Yeah, the hard way.
I think those things always happen suddenly too. Suddenly you're doing the wrong thing and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't even know where that line was. How
Yeah,
did that
yeah.
happen? And you're in a situation you have to think really quickly, like, what am I going to do here? Am I going to do this or this or this? Sometimes being able to reflect and ask people, it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, yeah. So what you want to do over time is build the kind of practices that make that less common. You're still going to be stuck in tricky situations, but if you've had practice at reasoning through situations, at least you've got some experience to draw upon.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think that happens, say, if I do everything as ethical as possible and within the scope of my practice and all of that stuff, then the chances of me messing it up are diminished.
Yes.
Then it's an external factor. So I have somebody else that's coming in and interplaying here and then causing, say, moral dilemmas.
Yes.
But it's not coming from me.
Yes. And well, it still
Right?
it still can come from you.
No.
So but none of us is perfect. But an
Yeah.
experienced teacher, that's part of the engaged process. But I'm less likely. I've got a more solid base to draw from, and my ethical compass has some consistency to it. That's a really strong position to come from. Doesn't mean you're going to get it perfectly correct every time, but it just means that, like you said, your possibilities of something going wrong through lack of thought on your own behalf are diminished. Things can still go wrong, as you said, from external stakeholders or just through bad luck. But at least I'll have created less problems for myself in my own practice by thinking through it.
I think sometimes you're in a catch-22 where both options are not good.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't come out of this on top.
Yes.
Something's happened, whatever it is, you name it, but it's a case of I need to figure out either maybe what's best for me, what's best for them, what's the least damaging to, and then you have to sort of position yourself and wear your own values. And then from there...
because at the end of the day, you have to do something that also sits well with who you are as a person, and your interests as well. So you mentioned before that some things that you do at the university levels, case studies. Maybe we can throw some examples your way, and you can.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, should we do it?
Yeah, and feel free. It's the wrong versus wrong is also as much of a dilemma as the right versus right. I have. Both of these things are going to be wrong, and which is the least worse. That's the same level of
But
reflection.
for whom?
For whom? That's right.
So I can be doing the least worst thing for me, but something very vastly worse for you.
Correct.
Or vice versa.
Then that's acting from a point of self-interestedness. So
Yeah.
so the traditional profession acts in the public good first. So that's always your answer as a professional, that if I'm a doctor and this is the best thing for the health of my patient, then that comes first in those situations of difficulty. So the Hippocratic oath of first do no harm, that idea of the foundation of health, that's a good place to start. And sometimes that means you've got to take one for the team as the professional. This is not in the best interests of me, but it is in the best interests of my client.
So would you maybe recommend that people adopt that philosophy, like doing
Yeah.
what's best for my client first?
Yes, yeah. I think it's a good model to use for an emerging industry like the fitness industry to model upon if it wants to become more professionalised. My client's interest, all things being equal, come first. Yeah, so it might be that the client's interests aren't always on top, but it's a good place to start. Am I doing the right thing by the health of my client?
I think taking your example of when you started looking for a coach to help you, like you touched on earlier, they're coming from a good place, number one. But I think, like, in that sort of dilemma, the person should be able to identify, right, this is beyond my scope.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I shouldn't be doing this. So
Correct.
I'm going to actually stop and say, I can't help this person with my exercise prescription, but can I help this person through another referral? Or can I sit down and kind of rationale, like, any advice they need? Maybe there's another way I can help them. But then that actually does work out in the coach's favor in the long run, because that client is going to leave with a solid foundation of trust in that professional.
Yes.
That, look, this, he or she couldn't help me, but they didn't missell me. They did put me first, and I have the utmost respect for that coach.
So in this instance, in my example, that would have been the right thing to do, but no one did that.
No one did that, that's right.
At all.
And the short-term self-interestedness of I want this client, I want this money is a big draw card.
It's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
It's huge. So it's a good point of connection, because long-term it's a better business strategy for you to provide excellent client-based service. That's going to help you in the long run. Maybe it's through referral, maybe it's through that person being a willing spokesperson. You haven't sold them on being your advertiser, but if you engage in excellent client-focused ethical practice, that person will become a word-of-mouth spokesperson for you, just because you've treated them the right way. So that the draw of that short-term financial gain, we all know that that's always a pull, but a better long-term strategy for reflective professional practice actually builds your reputation over time, and then that's probably a better long-run strategy in a business sense as well as well as being a more satisfying form of reflective practice.
Is there any other ones that you would see in the fitness industry that you can think about offhand?
Yeah, maybe particularly because you're also a business owner. Do you have any other examples that maybe you can share with people about some dilemmas that you've gone through, and what was your rationale and how you came to conclusion?
Came to a conclusion, yeah. Found a solution. Yeah, it mightn't be a perfect solution, but found the best reason through solution. So one example I can think of is the long-term instructor of instructors model. So how does a fitness industry provide instruction for future instructors in that same modality? So how do yoga teachers teach future yoga teachers, how do Pilates teachers, etc., etc. So when you're a provider of that instruction, it's beholden upon you to treat them well. An example would be in her own business experience about when Helen has trained someone, she'll always treat that person well over time. Come back to me for further training, I wish you well, give you referrals, all that kind of stuff. So from her perspective, I'm very pleased and proud of her ethical practice, as far as that's the right thing for her to do, for her to feel comfortable as a long-term business owner in the industry. But it's actually a good business strategy, like we talked about. It's a good long-term business strategy that helps garner respect and trust in your brand. That's not always reciprocated by every person that you train. Doesn't necessarily maintain that same sense of ethical practice. So Helen's had examples in the past of where she's trained people and then they've gone on and engaged in unethical conduct. As a competitor in the industry, it would be one example. So how do I try and steal business off somebody else who's already up and running? Or it might be that then they go ahead and do an unethical form of practice with their own clients. So they'd be clear examples that we've run into over the years as business owners.
And how did
we resolve it? So in that case, or maintaining the moral high ground's a good strategy, because you could fight fire with fire and engage in unethical practice, but as well as making you feel bad about yourself, that's contra to your own brand. So over time, that person will either succeed or not in their own endeavours. But if you remain true to your own principles, then you won't be contravening your own brand. And if they do well by being sneaky and cheat the system, good luck to them. But over time, things tend to
unravel?
Unravel. If someone's engaging in unethical practice, then over time it's more likely to be apparent in other areas of their business. So let's think through another practical example. Would be ethical practice with clients. So
I think that's a big one as well. Sorry to interrupt you again, especially because these days so much of what fitness professionals do is on social media. So they're showcasing their bodies, sometimes very sparsely dressed. So it does blur the lines. That's what you're talking about, right?
Well, yeah,
to a degree.
Yeah, that's a good example of what we were talking about before about being the model and exemplar, whether that's on social media or up the front of the class, and then the client wanting to mimic that either in their own practice or as an aspirational goal. So the proper practice with that client is a different approach than that model and repeat one of social media. So social media can help for a sense of belonging within a particular business. So it might help you feel attached to that business by what you can see. Might be an aspirational goal, but as a mode of instruction, it can only be for repetition through modelling rather than individualised care. So for us, the challenge in this social media world now is to find that line between the best instruction is one-on-one, person-to-person, and the worst individualised instruction is social media on Instagram. You know, that's the either end of the spectrum, because you don't get anything from that's individualised. You just you get to see a model.
Especially because the fitness industry is moving so much into like app training. Like everybody is an app now, and they can like go to the gym and do everything on that app. And it's very
that's actually I had a conversation with somebody recently, only last week, about is it ethical to do an Instagram post and say this is the how-to, and you have a video or you have an image and you have text from top to bottom with key points and things. Like, it's not the best way to learn. And I wonder who does learn. That's where the conversation came from. Like, do people learn? But the question was raised, like, it's not the best way to teach.
No.
It's quite a complex thing that you nearly shouldn't put the thoughts out there, put the teaching out there, because that's all well and good, like we spoke about earlier. When you have someone who can move and do everything correctly, they can tick the box, off they go. But as soon as something goes wrong, they're reflecting back off this piece of text and this image. And
learning like very advanced yoga poses on Instagram.
We spoke about that as well.
I'm going to learn how to handstand from like 2 little screenshots and some
it's
text.
Almost like the person is just trying to showcase their own knowledge, rather than really having the person at the end.
But then you also have the other side of it. Like, it's important for people who can actually do it. Like, the information should be there. People should know how to be able to handstand if they want to and have access to that information. But it's like there's a grey.
It's the grey on grey, isn't it?
Yeah, it is grey area.
Let me ask you this: is there a difference, or what is the difference, or is one a subset of the other, between ethics and professionalism?
Good question. So ethics would be the larger field, and professionalism. Well, professional ethics would be a subset of the field. So if I could explain ethics as the codified version of our moral sense of right and wrong. So we have different ways that we come up with right and wrong, and that's changed across time through history. It's also changed between cultures and still different between cultures now. So our morality is our sense of right and wrong. And as long as we've had human history, we've had some form of morality. It's probably actually existed before we were humans. You can see what we would use as a term of morality. You can see different types of moral practice being exhibited by other species. So whether it's cooperative behaviour or empathy or sympathy or those kinds of moral dimensions that have an emotional element. When ethics as a field started to emerge, it's more the structured, codified practice and training and thinking about what we have a sense of morality about. So the ethics itself for us at a university level is them learning about the theories and the practice that is involved in training ourselves in our sense of morality. The professional ethics element has traditionally come off that as training in those areas that I talked about that met those 4 areas. So law and medicine being the archetypal examples of what do you do as a professional rather than as a professional soccer player, someone who plays soccer for money, as a person who works in a profession in one of these trusted areas that are designed to try and benefit the public good. So the interesting bit for the health industry that we've been talking about is it kind of fits in that space because we're trying to help people be well, either rehabilitate them from a position of dysfunction or enhance their function to a new level. For professional ethics itself, that's why it doesn't exist yet in the fitness industry, because as we've talked about, we're coming from a position where it's still relatively young and it hasn't gone through that codified set of practices yet that physiotherapy or chiropractic has. So if we're thinking about how it should develop, I think probably over time the fitness industry needs to become more developed in this area about what is reflective, engaged professional practice, and engage in more prior training and ongoing continuing education training. If we can connect that back to the example of the social media, about how it is a useful tool, I can see it as a excellent form of practice, but whether that's right for me as the end user is a different concern. For ourselves, for our businesses, social media is only for brand identification and also for exemplar modelling, but really it works best when it's integrated with individualised instruction. So the best position you can be in is I learn stuff from social media and I also do real life stuff with someone on the ground, and they're the person that has the expertise to say that's not for you, or not for you yet, or tweak it this way, modify it this way. So it's not always possible for someone to have that integrated experience of real life experience with a fitness professional and online, but that would be the ideal, and that's the way that we try to approach it. It can also be that someone's just already healthy and up and going, and they're actually okay to use that as their primary method. For our businesses, it's there for access for someone who can't be in the studio. So a classic example, Helen used to always get requests from clients in the days before social media. Can you give me a list of exercises? I'm going on holidays and I really want to keep up my practice. So give me a list of exercises and I'll go through it while I'm away. So she used to do that, and social media now provides her a better tool for doing that, of access these forms of exercises through videos. But that's still based on, I already know your body.
The basics.
Yeah, the basics. Yeah. We developed a relationship, and now this enhances your practice in another area. That's different from, I saw a yoga person do a upside down headstand, amazing, on a beach somewhere in Bali. So now I should try that myself in my living room when I've got back issues. Yeah, that's a different world away. Yeah.
So then how can the fitness industry get to the stage where there's a codified set of ethics?
Yeah, it's a good question. So let's use Australia as an example. Some of the fitness modalities have developed their own professional associations, and over time they've become more codified. For example, needing to be registered as a trainer of such and such exercise, or having forms of CECs, of continuing education credits, to maintain your certification. So that can be one form that the industry can undertake, a more formalised approach to training, whether it's Cert 1, 2, 3, 4 through diplomas,
this is what we're kind of doing.
Exactly.
Like continuing education.
Exactly. And that has in this space, I think that's really useful for not just social media, but all kinds of interactive online experiences. Because live in a classroom, and right now when we're discussing, this is synchronous. We're having a discussion at the same time. But if you run an online course, it has to be asynchronous. You watch something or you read something, and then maybe you email back a question or do an assignment. There's a gap in that. So the learning happens asynchronously. I teach you something, you learn it, and then you demonstrate to me that you understand it. The difference between that now is you can do a little bit of live classroom sharing. You might be all in a virtual classroom at the same time. So that's another possibility for synchronous learning. So for continuing education, it's a fantastic opportunity for you to access something that you don't readily have access to in person on the ground. That should be then integrated into your own practice.
Yeah, particularly when you already have a foundation. That's the important part. Developing that foundation, having like, okay, I understand this, but I want to learn more about A and C.
Yeah, where are the gaps in my practice?
Yeah.
So if I'm thinking of myself as a professional in the field of health, and going back to our earlier example, I've done a 3-day course in Zumba, then I need to be aware that I'm only at the beginning of a very, very long and fantastic, wonderful, enlightening journey, but I'm only at the beginning. That doesn't mean I'm now an expert even in Zumba. I've only done a little short course. But recognising where the gaps are in my whole field of experience, I think would be a useful endeavour for any professional in the fitness industry to start thinking through, maybe even concept map it. I think it would be a good idea if the field more generally, through platforms like your own, had an understanding of this is where all of the fields that you could be engaging in education can allow you to go, and then you can start to pick and choose what you're interested in, and also build that field of training.
I think that's important, because a lot of the stuff that we do in the fitness industry is practical. So do you travel to the US to do a course that you realized, I wasn't actually that interested in it, or can you get an intro to what it might involve through our platform or through some other platform where, okay, this is, I'm not interested in that at all, or wow, that's got me, okay, let me look into this, and then you can go down that. But you can't do that if you don't have access, if you don't have the stimulation to go and expose yourself to it. So I think that's one of our main missions of this, and these conversations as well, is to just give people exposure to different ideas, things that they're not necessarily thinking about, because you don't realize, going back to the ethical dilemmas, you don't realize sometimes that you're in it until it's too late. And if you want to go selfish, it could cost you. It could cost your reputation, it could cost you financially, it could cost you your job, if you do something that you just had no idea. And you were always there from the good place, meaning well at the very beginning, and it's unfortunate that you got entangled in that mess and you'd no system or mechanism or fallback to help you. So I think
I think the ramifications of not acting ethically are huge too. Like you were just touching on about your reputation, and then about your relationships within the industry and your peers, and then also the legal ramifications. Like if you hurt somebody, well, here it's a little bit different because the law is very different, but say in countries like America or Australia, you can have very serious legal ramifications for saying that you're qualified to do something and not actually being able to do that, or injuring somebody or hurting them. So it's important for people, my point is that it's important for people to actually start to think about this, and one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on.
Thanks. So the platforms like this, I think, are a fantastic idea for exposure to what I don't know yet. And that's the first step. If we think about that example of I did something wrong and I didn't even realise till afterwards. I came from a good place and then, actually that was the wrong thing to do. Experiences taught me that. So I wasn't aware that I didn't know. So I didn't do it from a Machiavellian sneaking, I'm going to do it because I'm an evil little so-and-so. I did it from a well-intentioned place. So becoming aware of what you don't know is the first step.
I think it's important to remember that some people they don't know what they don't know.
So through some of the examples that we've been thinking about, a well-intentioned person can be thinking they're doing the right thing, and then experiences taught them through trial and error that actually they shouldn't have been doing that. Experiences taught you that you didn't know that you didn't know. So it would be better through platforms such as this that people experience that they know they don't know the answer before experience teaches them the hard lesson through trial and error. So for someone to know they don't know is the first step to being able to realise that I now have the answer. I've now become sufficiently expert in this area that now I know that I know.
Because they all come from the same place, doesn't it? Like they make a mistake genuinely. They say, I thought I was doing my best, I thought I was doing right, and now I just realised, that wasn't possibly the best way to do it.
I also think when people are new to an industry too, they don't realise until you've already made a mistake. You don't. I know a lot of colleagues who put lots of photos on social media and then they get unwarranted attention, and they don't realise that that's going to happen until it's already happened, and then they're receiving all of this attention from male clients who want to do sessions with them but only for a specific reason. So it's like, maybe I shouldn't have done that, and
I put the wrong messages out into the universe. We see it's interesting because the industry is like a young professional industry. There's not somebody who's in their late 30s, early 40s, in their 50s, sitting in the boardroom, over a coffee, relating 20 years of experience to the new guy or the new girl. It's just all young people. Like the old people tend to move on out of the industry. So I imagine people make the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So if the archetypal fitness person who's just come out of training is, a teenager or an early 20s person, and they're young and fit and healthy, and they're expert in their form of practice, it doesn't mean they're an expert instructor, but they're expert in their own form of practice. I'm really good at yoga, I'm really good at Pilates, really good at CrossFit, Zumba, whatever it's going to be. That's very, very young if we were thinking about in comparison to a professional. I'm just out of medical training. Well, it takes 6 years for a start, so I can't get out until I'm 24. But then I'm also supported for years after that by well-researched, well-trained experts in the field. The industry of young professionals has a churn through, and that person that's coming in can be a really bright-eyed, well-meaning person who runs into difficulty only through experience. It would be great if there was more learning involved in the industry. And it's certainly something that we do in our businesses, because Helen's been instructing for 25 years in this field. She's able to take a mentor role, and that would be better if the industry had more of that available, both mentoring at the expert level, not just I'm good in my area, but I'm a genuine expert in the entire field. It'd be great for mentoring for that, and these kind of platforms allow some access to that. So at least you can see, oh, hang on, I really don't know everything here, and I should increase my skill base, think about my practice.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Greg, for all of your knowledge and for imparting it. If people want to follow up with you or find you on social media, how do they do that? Unless you don't want to be found.
Well, for myself, we'll provide some contact details through your site. But the two businesses that we own are Pilates Moves, and so that's pilatesmoves.com, and we own Energy Pilates, which is energypilates.com.au.
Yeah, and they're both on Instagram.
Both on Instagram and connected through socials as well,
And you filmed a short talk for us for the website that people will be able to watch on alifeoфeducation.com.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, well, thank you for coming in.
Yeah,
Looking
thanks,
forward
Greg.
to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.